I've asked someone I know from some other groups that I'm a part of to share today his story. I've heard his story before, and it's a good one, and I'm excited to hear it again. I'm excited to have him here at this meeting. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jack from Cleveland.
Hi, everyone. Jack, alcoholic and addict. Thanks for asking me, Bridget. I appreciate it. And thanks for the service. Yeah, I don't believe I've ever made this meeting. I do get around a little bit. My work schedule is such that it's actually easier for me to log into a lot of meetings when I'm at work. So that's one of those things that was I have some gratitude for it, but it took a pandemic for it to come to be that way. I have been sober since March 22nd, 2019, just to give some, I guess, some perspective on where I'm coming from. And I also like to, add that I was an addict because that is absolutely part of my story. Drank alcoholically up until the day I got sober, but at the same time, I was more than willing and eager to use opiates in the pill form any chance I got, and they went together. For me, I've used this before. This analogy that I like peanut butter, which you could think of that as the alcohol. I like jelly, which you could think of as the pills. But boy, you put them together and they're great, and that's the way it was for me. It was a daily drinker at the point of the day I went into rehab. And I would have used the opiates as often as I could get my hands on them. So, maybe I got through a few times of getting rid of the withdrawals, the physical withdrawals, but then, as soon as they became available again, I would go right back to them, drinking all the way. So I got sober 49 years old. I'm 51. So my sobriety date and my birthday are very close together, and they'll be coming up here. So I'll be 52 and 3 years sober, which I'm looking forward to greatly. Born in Cleveland, Ohio. For most of my life, I lived here, except for 1 year when I was in high school. After my parents got divorced, I moved to Los Angeles for 1 year with my mother and stepfather, and then I decided I didn't like LA and moved back with my father here in Cleveland, and that was about 1985, 86. And then from 1991 until 1996, I was in the Air Force. My wife and young family at that time. When I got out of the Air Force, I took a job with Union Pacific Railroad as a locomotive electrician in North Platte, Nebraska. And so that was a good chunk. That was 8 years of being away from Cleveland. But we eventually came back here, mostly because our family was here and we wanted our kids to know grandma and grandpa and things like that. So I feel like my drinking is fairly typical that you hear in the rooms. My father and grandfather were pretty regular drinkers. They're both steel workers, like you would expect to hear somebody in a Rust Belt being in the 70s and 80s. I think I had a pretty decent childhood. Living in the city, not in the suburbs, not in the country around Cleveland, but actually in Cleveland, we had a lot of neighborhood bars. Literally, like 5 houses from my house was a bar on the corner. Most of them aren't around anymore because, unless you have parking, people usually don't frequent bars anymore. But this is, one of them throwbacks, and in the 70s and 80s, there was still quite a few around. So my father was typical. He'd get off work no matter what shift it was, and he'd usually be at that bar drinking, and then he'd come home. And he was not physically abusive, but he was definitely emotionally abusive towards my mother. A lot of accusatory things like, "Oh, you're out cheating on me. You're why are you wearing so much makeup? Is it somebody for at work?" That kind of shit. That ultimately led to her leaving and divorcing. But at the same time, although those things I didn't enjoy, I still idolized my father and my grandfather, his father, because of their like hard working, hard partying ways. And drinking was around, every holiday, and it was common to have, give me a little sip of beer or something like that. But when I became 15 or 16, around that age, I think 15, I would say probably is about the time that, I started drinking somewhat regularly in high school. And a lot of it was, it was definitely a social lubricant. Like people say, I'm short. I'm about 5'4", so being a small kid growing up, it was, it was all of a sudden you can drink and act a certain way around your friends, and now your height isn't an issue anymore. Nobody cares. And I was good enough in sports and things like that to have fun, but never good enough to really do anything with it. So I played, baseball and some football, and I wrestled. And then once I got into 10th grade, after coming back from California, I actually picked up skateboarding. So I did that a good bit in the 80s, and that became my sport. Similar, good enough to have fun, but not good enough really to do anything with it. But along that came the, regular drinking, hanging out with friends. I felt like it was a rite of passage. My father really didn't care too much. He was kind of preoccupied with his own drinking, doing things. So by the time I was 15 or 16, I was going to school, and I graduated high school, but it was just it was like that's what you're supposed to do as a 16-year-old. You're supposed to be out partying and chasing girls. So there was never really any repercussions from it from my father. And ended up meeting my wife. We worked together when we were in high school, and didn't really date until after we graduated. And along that whole time was drinking was involved. Um, you know, a lot of the neighborhood bars my father went to, it was like the day you graduated high school, they served you, even if you weren't under 21. I could walk in there and get a drink because I'm Jack's kid. My father's name is Jack also. But yeah, get him, whatever he wants, it's no problem. But went to college for a little bit, and dropped out, didn't take it serious. Most of my friends weren't serious about going to school, so we were just hanging out. And then my wife and I, we ended up moving in together at 18 years old. Just thought it was a good idea. We dated for about 6 months, and next thing you know, we're living together, and then pretty quickly decided to get married. And so we got married when I was 20. And a little bit after getting married, I said, yeah, I kind of got to do something. I dropped out of college and decided to join the Air Force. And that became my college. I used that to, become an electrician, essentially, is what my core job is. But I do, it's a bit different than that now than I think the traditional electrician, what my career is now. But along the way was alcohol. And that was the first time, I think, when we moved away. My wife was pregnant with my son, and we were alone, that I really had a lot of that longing for missing the party. People call it the FOMO. I was sure all my friends back in Cleveland were having a good time. And that was the first time where the drinking switched from being like social to drinking alone in my apartment. My wife would waitress at night. My job in the Air Force was basically kind of like a Monday through Friday day shift job. And I would come home in the evening, she'd go to work, and I would drink by myself, kind of woe is me, I'm missing out on everything my friends are doing, that kind of thing. And that's kind of, for the most part, the way the drinking was. I was stationed in Japan for 3 years, and while we were there, we had both my daughters. So I have a son and 2 daughters, and they're all in their 20s. My son's about to be 30 now. So, this is kind of a long time ago. But we ended up, was successful in the military, wasn't going to make it a career, did it, like I said, as a choice between college. It was my college to learn a skill, learn a trade. And eventually, after working for the railroad, we found ourselves wanting to come back to Cleveland, and we just up and moved here. And I settled in at a company, and ironically enough, pretty quickly, it was a smaller company, and their maintenance department was kind of operating on a shoestring. It was family owned, and I feel like maybe I had some of the most formal training than anybody there. A lot of other people there were like backyard maintenance guys. And I was given the position to run the shop after the manager at that point disappeared for 3 days. And then I found out that he had a crack addiction. So it's, it's, I guess that's where the irony comes in, that he lost his job and I was promoted. I'm 29 years old, 30 years, just about to turn 30 when I get this promotion, and I'm kind of on top of the world and very busy. The company was growing, and, I was feeling really good about myself and, working hard. So definitely the weekends were, it's hard work and the success I'm having. I deserve the drink. I really need the drink. That's what working hard all week's for, But then when I was about 31, 32, my father, who had some surgeries, was like, "Oh man, you're working hard. Here, I got some of these pills you might want to try. Help you out, help your back out, help your muscles out from being sore. And, you need to, he was helping me out. And, in the beginning, it was like, oh, okay, I'll take 1 or 2 of these. And then I realized wow, if I drank on them, they were great. So that begins the story of my opiate abuse. Never had a procedure or anything or a doctor really prescribe them for me that started me on the path. It was simply the fact that I realize now, being sober, that I really like to, I guess, get drunk or high. And one of the revelations I came to, is, since being in the rooms and being sober, is a time when I was about probably 6, 7, 8 years old. That time frame, I went to the dentist, and my mom took me, and they give you laughing gas, nitrous oxide. And I remember being on the ride home with my mother and saying, "Mom, is there any way we can buy some of that to have at home?" And I think that's kind of a clue to way my mind works. Like, oh, that was, great. It would be great to watch Saturday morning cartoons with too, so it just, so these are things that I've learned in sobriety about myself. Yeah, so I still succeeded at work, but the drinking and the opiates became just like the diseases are progressive. Progress was everything. And probably the last 5, maybe even more than that, years, I worked for this company for almost 20 years. It was a point where it was like straight up pill junkie, daily drinker was who I was. I woke up in the morning and I would find, a different gas station each morning that was open at 5:30, because you couldn't go to 2 in a row because you didn't want the guy to think you were an alcoholic who was selling it to you. So you'd find a different one on your way to work to get a cheap bottle of vodka. And then usually I would start going through the text to see who I knew around the city that might have something that they could either sell me or front me until I got the money. And there were even some people at where I worked at that they were my sources. Because over the years, you build the reputation that you are a buyer, and people will say, "Hey, I got an aunt that just had some dental work. If you aren't going to take those, auntie, I got a guy at work that'll buy them off you. Here you go." So I was always known to be a buyer. And all this time I was still the maintenance manager. I was in charge of, capital projects, keeping the facility running. It's growing. But each morning I was drinking and I was getting pills whenever I could. And a lot of times when I called off work, it was because I couldn't get anything. And it was, the withdrawals were part of it. So 2018, that summer, I'm getting to the point where I've really isolated myself from my family. I'm starting to feel a lot of shame. I've essentially moved down to our basement, which happens to be where I'm sitting now. And not because my wife was like, I'm sick of your shit or whatever. I just migrated down here and slept on the couch and would get ready for work because I could do what I wanted. If I had to text somebody in the middle of the night, or I had to get up extra early to go meet somebody, if I wanted to have her not smell the alcohol on my breath, on a Wednesday night when, why would I be drunk in the middle of the week for no reason? So that's why I did that. I just slowly, and before we knew it, it was like 3 years of pretty much living in this basement. It was a rarity for me to go up and sleep in the bedroom. And the signs were there that my days were numbered, I guess. And actually, probably a lot of people wouldn't have given their significant other as much uh, leeway as she's given me. And so summer 2018, my daughter, one of my youngest daughter was home from college, and I was been drinking. It was like a Saturday, and I had gone into work probably to get some pills and buy some vodka, and said I had to go to work for something, and came home. And of course, some arguments started over something silly, because when you drink like that, and you're under the influence, you're always on the defensive that somebody's attacking you, taking away the things that you deserve. Don't they understand how hard life is for me? I need this stuff. And I think I kind of broke down and told my wife, said, hey, look, I've been drinking. And I went out and got one of the bottles out of the garage that I had hidden. Said, I've been drinking this like every day, one of these fits of shit ass rot gut vodka. And that's where I left it. And so she's like, okay, well, we'll help you. My daughter's like, we'll help you, Dad. They get I have a little bar in my basement. It's like, let's get all the booze out of the house. Let's get everything out of here. We'll help you. And that kind of lasted a little bit. And then I started drinking, hiding it from everybody, and drinking again. And all the while, I'm still getting the pills whenever I could. So even though I may have gone a couple of weeks without drinking, I was still taking the pills. That I still was keeping that secret. My wife never knew that I was dabbling for 19 years in the pills. Once I came clean, a lot of things, behaviors and things I did, all of a sudden she got oh, that fucking makes sense moment. So, but I got back into drinking before work, and somebody at work said they thought I was acting off and that maybe I was under the influence of something. And I kind of felt something like this might be coming, that it was leading to that. And so the human resource manager called me aside and said, hey, Jack, somebody thinks you might be drinking or under the influence of alcohol. And they sent me over to an occupational health clinic, and I blew like a 0.23. I was like, oh crap. And I came back to work, and I said, well, I need, one of the guys in my department, my main mechanic, he gave me a ride home. And I told the wife, they wanted me. Well, they never drug tested me. They just, if I would have failed, I would have failed for having opiates. But later I found out the human resource manager was pro marijuana. And I was pretty well liked guy there, even though I had my issues. Everybody, he didn't want to hurt me. He wanted to do as little damage to me as possible. So he made up this sheet and said, hey, you got to go to AA once a week. You got to go to some sort of meeting once a week. So that was my first AA meeting ever. It was the following Wednesday. It was on a Monday when I got caught. It was the following Wednesday. It was around Labor Day of 2019 or 2018. I'm sorry. And I walked into the room, and it was a big book meeting at a local Alano club here in Cleveland called the Sahara Club. And they almost had meetings 24/7, all traditional. And I didn't know what a big book was other than the initials AA. I had no idea. And it was a huge meeting. It was noon meeting at like 90 people in there. And I was able just to hide in the corner and get my little paper stamped. And then I did that once a week, went to a meeting at that particular club, just picked one to get my once a week stamp. And I go to take it to the human resource manager and said, yes, here's my month. I did one a week. And he looked at me and goes, oh, you're actually doing that? And I was like, yeah. He goes, I just had to do something, saying I did something for you, because I didn't expect you to actually go. Well, once I heard that, I was back off to the races. Screw it. I'm drinking, I'm getting the pills, and then the opiates are getting harder to get. So some of the production guys I work with dabble in cocaine, so I started messing with coke. I don't know if I'd ever done it in my life, So this is going to be in November of 2018. And my drinking and drugs is just off the rails, just completely going. My wife thinks I'm drinking a little bit. I don't know where it's at. And I go meet with a therapist finally in March. Well, after I have a big time bender. I have a big bender. My wife goes out of town, and it was St. Patrick's Day weekend. And she's not around. So I just let my kids are grown and they're out of the house. So I was left to my own devices. I could drink and use the way I wanted. And at the same time, I'm feeling total shame for who I've become. I'm not the person I remember from my younger years. I'm only motivated by drinking and using, and any reason to was a good enough reason. The fact I woke up was a reason to drink and and get high. She came back from her trip and I was kind of on the downside of that bender, and met with a therapist and said, "Yeah, doc, I like to run around and sneak around the city. And it's like I have this alternate life and it's exciting." And he goes, "No, it's not." He goes, "You're just a fucking junkie, drug addict, alcoholic." And I don't know if I was still under the influence, but he convinced me that day to go to detox the next morning. So that's my sobriety date. And when I got out, I said, well, I'm going to have to not have, I had some resentments towards the guys from the traditional meetings I was going to. I was I wasn't overly beaten up over it, but I just was like, I've been an evangelical atheist since I was like 20. Anybody who wanted to argue about it, I would argue about why religion's stupid and absurd. And even though I was raised Lutheran and I went to Sunday school, I was against all that. So I discovered that Cleveland had some agnostic meetings, and I went to Westside Agnostics, which is a Sunday or Saturday morning meeting in the basement of a library in Lakewood, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland. And the moment I walked in that meeting, I could just tell there was a chance for me. I'd been 30 days out. I'd been to rehab for 30 days. I'm freshly out of rehab. And I was hooked line. I'm like, I got to make this work. I'd been through the withdrawals. I didn't have any chemicals in my system. I was feeling great. And I'm like, but I got to find a meeting that's going to work for me. And when I walked into that basement, I think there's about 50, 60 people in that meeting. And there was so much diversity. There was people that you could tell were definitely professionals. Subsequently, I found out there's lawyers, there's doctors, but there's also people that are tradesmen. There was also people that maybe are down and out in that meeting. And maybe there was people that, that are working in the, in the restaurant industry, all walks of life in that meeting. And everybody was laughing, having a good time. They were showing each other respect. And there was literally felt like there was no classism or elitism in that meeting. And I'm like, this is where I want to be. This is going to work for me. So that became my home group and in person. So the first year of my sobriety was in person. And then the pandemic hit and Zoom hit. And, we are one of the guys who unfortunately is not part of our home group. He kind of went on. He set up, he's like, hey, I think Zoom would work if we want to meet. And it was just us trying to stay together while everything went on lockdown. Like, hey, let's meet on Zoom. And then it expanded to, we go to 6 nights a week now at 6 o'clock. We have our meetings where in person, it was just 4 days a week. And they were actually different meetings. They weren't technically Westside Agnostics. There was a big book and this and that. But so once the pandemic hit, it was like my sobriety kicked up to another level because of Zoom. All of a sudden I found myself going to Tuasnua in Ireland. I do see Bridget quite a bit in the evenings when I'm on afternoon shift, because I'll be going to a meeting in California at 10 o'clock at night when I come in from doing equipment checks at work. And it's been unbelievable how much it's changed my life. Obviously I still need to come to meetings for to keep sober. And that's something I always have to remember, because, the further away you get, the more, and you have a lot of emotional sobriety tools, I find myself going, well, if I was to drink a little bit, I know how to handle it now. And I always got to remind myself, especially when I hear from someone who's maybe had a relapse, that that's exactly what they were thinking, and before they went down a path. And it's kind of like a way a lot of my drinking and drug use is when I felt good is when I wanted to do it more. Cause it was like, well, if I feel good now, how much better can I feel if I add to it? Yeah, so I do service work. I don't sponsor. I run a Tuesday meeting. I'm the secretary, host, or however they call it in the Zoomverse. And at at this time, it's one of those things where I'm looking back on, and it seems so quick. And I think for somebody new that goes, man, it's going to be, I can't wait till I have a year. I have, like me come up in 3 years. Um, it can go by quick and it can be great. Uh, you know, I ended up leaving that company after about a month of sobriety. After a month, well, 2 months, because I was out of rehab, I kind of reflected on that I didn't really want to work there anymore. There was straight up just triggers. When you're sneaking off to the boiler room to do drugs and things like that, you don't want to go to the boiler room because it's going to remind you of doing that. So I needed to physically get away from that location. But also I built up some pretty big resentments against the higher ups in management. The company had done some changes, and it wasn't the company that I was fond of that I started there 20 years earlier. And I thought it would be a good break. So sent out my resume. And I now work as an engineer at a data center, and basically make sure all the servers stay cool and have electricity. It's pretty much is what I say the job is. But it's shift work, which being sober is not an issue. If I was drinking and an active addiction, there's no way I could have worked, midnight to or 11 o'clock to 7 in the morning and not been able to sneak off site to go meet there's all that lifestyle is gone, and it's so free. It's just when I really think where I was at, the day or the week before going into rehab, I just can't believe I'm the same person. It's incredible how much the changes are that take place. So I think I've gone pretty long enough, and I thanks again, Bridget. If you work AA, as much as you put into it, as much as they'll give it back. That's what I would have to say, though. So with that, I pass. Peace.